My ex humiliated me online. I returned the favor publicly. I never thought a single post could destroy me until she did it. Honestly, I still can't believe how fast it all went south. One minute, I'm scrolling through my morning feed, sipping my coffee like any other day, and the next, well, my entire life apparently had turned into a punchline. I remember that exact moment because it's burned into my brain like some horrifying tattoo. I'm Alex, 27, just trying to make my way in the world. I have a decent job in marketing, a small but solid circle of friends, and what I thought was a pretty normal life. I'm not flashy. I'm not obnoxiously ambitious. I like quiet weekends, random podcasts, and sometimes overthinking things way too much. And I used to think I had a good relationship with Emma. Emma. That name used to make my heart race in the best way. We met in college, and for a while, it was all perfect. She was vibrant, charming, and funny in a way that could make any room light up. We laughed a lot. We had inside jokes that nobody else understood, and I genuinely thought she was my person. I even told myself that we were one of those couples, the kind you saw in movies and thought, wow, that's real love. But somewhere along the way, things changed. The jokes became sarcasm. The laughter became criticism. And the charm, well, the charm was still there, but mostly aimed at manipulating me. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. Emma had always had this streak of arrogance, a need to be admired, and I, naively, stubbornly, thought I could handle it. I thought love meant patience, but love doesn't mean being humiliated, and humiliated I was. It all started that Monday morning. I'd slept in later than usual after a crappy weekend of freelance work, and my first instinct was to scroll through social media. Big mistake. Because there, staring at me from my feed, was a post from Emma that made my stomach drop like I'd just been shoved down a flight of stairs. It wasn't just a picture. It was a gallery. Every image was carefully chosen, each one worse than the last. There I was, captured at my most vulnerable, laughing at a joke I thought we shared, looking awkward in a shirt she'd always said looked cute, a video clip of me rambling about my ideas for a project, edited so that my words sounded ridiculous. And the captions. God, the captions. She had twisted every private conversation we'd ever had, every sincere thing I'd said, and spun them into jokes. Public jokes everyone could see. Friends, coworkers, my extended family. Because apparently, she had tagged all of them. Remember when Alex thought he was funny? Hash nice try, hash awkward. Much. The likes and comments were instant. People were laughing, strangers were joining in, and the worst part, people I considered friends. People I trusted. Some of them didn't even ask if I was okay. They just assumed it was all true. They assumed I deserved the mockery. I felt frozen. My coffee went cold in my hand. My phone slipped from my fingers onto the floor as I sat on the edge of my bed, my heart hammering in a rhythm that felt like it was trying to escape my chest. How could she do this? How could someone who had told me they loved me take everything private, everything sacred between us, and weaponize it for public humiliation? I tried to respond rationally at first. I messaged her, of course. Emma, why are you doing this? I typed, my thumb shaking. This isn't funny, it's cruel. Please take it down. Her reply was immediate, sharp, and dripping with that same venom I'd ignored for so long. Oh, come on, Alex. It's not my fault everyone sees how pathetic you really are. Just accept it. People are laughing with me. I read it over and over, each time feeling smaller, more hollow. Laughing with her? No. They were laughing at me. And somehow, in that moment, I understood that she didn't see it as cruel. She saw it as entertainment. The fallout was instant. Friends I'd known for years started keeping distance. Some sent awkward, "Are you okay?" messages that I could barely bring myself to respond to. Colleagues whispered in corners, pretending not to notice that I had gone from competent professional to social media joke in the span of an hour. Even strangers started tagging me in memes inspired by her post. My life, my dignity, my reality had been hijacked, and there was nothing I could do. At least that's what I thought. For a day, maybe two, I wallowed. I scrolled through the comments, trying to understand why people were laughing, why she had done this. I cried in the shower. I yelled at the empty apartment. I tried to pretend I wasn't affected, while my reflection in the bathroom mirror screamed the truth. I was humiliated, and I had no clue how to fight back. But then something shifted. A small spark, like the tiniest flame refusing to die. Anger, not just at Emma, but at the situation, at the injustice, at everyone who had watched and done nothing. And with anger came clarity. If she thought she could ruin me with a few clicks and likes, she was wrong. She had underestimated me. She had underestimated how far someone could go when cornered. I didn't want to respond impulsively. I didn't want to stoop to her level and post angry replies or start a fight online. No, that would be too obvious, too messy. I wanted precision. I wanted strategy. I wanted a revenge so complete, so well executed, that she couldn't recover from it without looking ridiculous herself. I spent the night thinking, plotting, analyzing every post she'd ever made, every comment, every public image. I thought about her friends, her habits, her weaknesses. She had always been meticulous in image online, always polished, always perfect. That perfection would be her undoing, I realized. If I could expose her, not recklessly, but cleverly, then maybe, just maybe, I could balance the scales. And just like that, the humiliation stopped being just an injury. It became fuel. I knew this wouldn't be easy. Emma was smart, manipulative, and relentless, but so was I, in my own way. I had intelligence, patience, and the ability to plan 3 steps ahead. She thought she had won by shaming me in front of the world, but she hadn't considered that her little game had given me something far more valuable, a roadmap to revenge. By the time the sun came up, I had already started my mental checklist. This wasn't going to be about petty insults or quick shots. It was going to be calculated, strategic, public, unforgettable. And as I stared at the early morning sky from my apartment window, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't just survive this. I would turn it around. I would make sure that everyone who had laughed at me, friends, strangers, coworkers, even Emma, would see me rise above the humiliation, and they would see her fall. I smiled, not because I was happy, not yet, but because for the first time since that post, I felt something I hadn't felt in a while. Control. The game had begun. I realized that if I wanted revenge, I had to play smarter, not louder. I said that out loud once in the hollow silence of my kitchen at 2 a.m., and it felt like a spell. Not the dramatic, movie-style kind, no slow-motion throwdown or viral confession, but the quiet, dangerous kind that rearranges how you breathe. I'd been walking the line between panic and rage for days. The humiliation had been public, ugly, and fast, but my response could not be any of those things. If I hurled myself into the same chaos she did, I'd only confirm the narrative she'd already sold to everyone. That was dramatic, unstable, and very, very easy to mock. So I did the thing I'm embarrassingly proud of. I made a spreadsheet. There's something oddly calming about grids and columns when your life feels like it's been turned into a meme. I labeled the tabs Emma profiles, friends patterns, assets, narrative levers, and because I'm dramatic and like to keep things cinematic, endgame. I know I sound like a psychopath, but planning is my coping mechanism. Also, marketing logic. I've been trained to map audiences and identify persuasive triggers. Turns out, those same skills are great for revenge if you don't use them to build ad campaigns. I started where everyone does. Her profiles, Instagram, curated perfection, lots of staged brunch photos, filtered sunsets, and a comment section full of people telling her how goals she was. Twitter, quick, cutting remarks, and a lot of reposting of her own hot takes. LinkedIn, polished, professional, which she used to remind people she was both pretty and competent. TikTok, short clips of parties, sips of cocktails, her laugh edited to sound lighter and more effortless than it actually was. She posted at certain times, used the same phrases and captions, and, crucially, relied on the same small group of people to amplify everything she put out her inner cheer squad. Patterns are comforting in their predictability. Emma loved 3 things: control, applause, and the feeling of being right. She built a brand around being unbothered. That brand was fragile. Brands are, by definition, constructed narratives, and narratives always have seams. Next tab, friends patterns. This is where the real gold was. I mapped out the people who liked and commented first, who shared screenshots to other platforms, and who were tagged in her posts most often. There were a few predictable boosters. Naomi, who was loyal in that performative way where her likes came with a clap emoji. Theo, who amplified by resharing, and Maya, who commented long, supportive paragraphs. Then there were the casuals, acquaintances, who would only chime in if it was easy and safe to do so. I color-coded them because spreadsheets make you feel powerful. I also made a note of the fissures. There were people she'd fallen out with a college roommate who hadn't spoken to her in 2 years, a former coworker with a simmering grievance, and one ex who'd publicly accused her of being manipulative a few months back. Those were potential X factors. I didn't plan to recruit traitors or stage a betrayal again. No harassment, no illegal nonsense, but people with their own reasons to roll their eyes at her perfection were useful in understanding what she'd be most defensive about. The assets tab was a mix of things. Private messages I still had. Some screenshots from a stupid, nostalgia-fueled remember when thread that proved she wasn't always as polished as she pretended. Receipts from dates and an embarrassing voicemail she'd once left after a drunk night that made me laugh and that, if miscontextualized, could be mortifying. I felt my conscience prick when I added that last one. I'm not a monster, but I also knew that if I played this slowly and smartly, there was a way to use these assets without turning into the caricature she'd painted of me. Narrative levers. This is marketing speak turning into personal warfare. I wrote down the themes Emma relied on to paint me. Awkward, naive, not funny, clingy. If I wanted to counter that, I needed to hit at the seams of her own story. People hate cheaters, liars, and hypocrites, and theater, even the petty kind, loves irony. So the plan wasn't to post vindictive screenshots of her or create fake scandals. The plan was to unveil the inconsistencies in her curated self in a way that looked like an organic unraveling. Let her supporters do the digging. I'd be the person who nudged things in inconvenient directions until the pattern couldn't be ignored. I needed help. Even if I was clever with narratives, there were technical and social angles where collaboration would save time and reduce risk. I don't have a hacker friend. I don't even watch hacking shows, but I have friends who know people. I called Jonah. Jonah was the kind of guy who could make a data visualization look like modern art and then talk your ear off about how algorithms shape attention. He's brilliant, a little chaotic, and ethically flexible in the way that's useful for marketing work. He can build systems that nudge people without outright breaking laws. He owes me a favor because I once covered for him at a job interview when he showed up late and barefoot. I pitched him the abridged, sanitized version of my problem, no illicit hacks. Just help me understand how social amplification works so I can stop being a meme. Jonah came over the next evening with 2 coffees, 3 notebooks, and a ridiculous grin, like he'd been waiting for an excuse to prove how clever he is. He didn't ask about morals. He asked about timelines and collateral. His first question was practical. Do you want to reclaim your image or dismantle hers? I told him both because why not? He nodded, and that's when it felt real. A plan needs a second brain to be legitimized. He was my second brain. We brainstormed like 2 slightly unhinged consultants. We talked about the velocity of a story online, how small, repeatable signals, the right reaction, GIF, a meme that reframes something, a shared private message with context, can add up to a shift in perception. Jonah drew diagrams of node-based networks and told me how to seed doubts without looking like the one who seeded them. His comfort with that gray zone both terrified and excited me. I told him clearly, no doxing, no fabricated claims, no illegal access. He smiled and said, we won't have to. That was the first real assurance I needed. Then there was Maya. I hadn't spoken to her in months after a minor argument about an ill-timed joke at Emma's birthday. But I texted anyway. The message was simple and boring. Hey, can we talk? Need advice? To my surprise and relief, she agreed to coffee. Maya was quieter than the rest of Emma's entourage, less performative. Over cappuccinos, I didn't spill everything. I never do, but I did mention the post and how hurtful it was. She winced, then did that slow shake of the head people do when they're trying to compute something embarrassed, but true. Emma can be theatrical, she said. She likes being the center of a funny story, but sometimes she overplays it. I asked carefully about the dynamics within their group. Who were loyal for the attention, who actually believed everything. Her answer was a list that matched my spreadsheet. I didn't recruit her to betray Emma. I recruited her to be a human antenna, someone who could, in a conversation, voice the tiny things that didn't line up with Emma's public persona, a seed plan, human version. I also reached out to Laura, my college roommate who still followed all the nostalgia threads and had the receipts of the weird little moments Emma used to be. She sent me a voice note, a short, private memory of Emma being insecure about a thing she now mocked publicly. You'll embarrass her, Laura said with that unapologetic bluntness that only old friends have, but you'll be doing it with receipts. That's what I wanted. Receipts, not lies. Here's what I learned while I was building the strategy. Revenge is boring before it's dramatic. There were a lot of small administrative things. Timing matters, context matters. The human tendency is to escalate quickly and loudly. That's exactly what I avoided. Loudness lasts a minute. Smartness ripples for months. So I mapped the moves. The plan had layers and contingencies, each with a name I found satisfying. Layer 1, reframe. Start small. Post content that subtly reframes what people already saw. Example, a throwaway tweet from me that's witty and confident, no mention of Emma, posted at the same time as her most active window. If her cheer squad notices that I'm not the caricature she made me to be, the first seed of doubt is planted. Layer 2, contextual leaks. Carefully release context that makes her post look manipulative. This meant repurposing private messages we'd both sent, the ones where she teased me about being awkward, in a way that was clearly meant to be shared. Not for mockery, but to show the pattern. This is a person who publicly weaponizes private moments. Layer 3, social proof shift. Use small influencers and mutuals, people who resonate with our community, to question the narrative without explicitly attacking her. Jonah could model how a few reposts by the right people could change a convo's framing. This is where Maya being a human antenna mattered. A conversation she left slightly more skeptical than before would be worth 1,000 angry posts. Layer 4, the mirror. This is the eventual aha move. Not shame, not a revenge vid or a public takedown, but a reveal of inconsistency that forces people to see the discrepancy between Emma's curated image and her private behavior. The intention was not to harm for harm's sake, but to puncture the narrative she built on other people's laughs. We tested the waters gently. I posted nothing for 3 days while Jonah and I watched. Then, on a Thursday afternoon when engagement historically peaked, I tweeted something that was almost nothing. A short, self-deprecating line about being human and messy, paired with a photo of me laughing in a way that didn't make me look awkward. It was intentionally ambiguous, and I watched the metrics like a gambler watching cards. Within hours, a couple of mutuals I respected liked it. A witty reply came from someone with a modest following who reframed the mood with a small joke about weird exes. No direct reference to Emma, just a soft, collective shrug from people who mattered. The reaction wasn't explosive, and that was the point. Little nudges accumulate. People who had laughed in the comments of Emma's post might now pause and think, maybe that wasn't the whole story. The beauty of the approach was that it let the audience do the heavy lifting. Humans love patterns. We fill in gaps. If I provided just the right cracks, the rest would follow. Emma did not notice the first motions. That was the best part. She was busy refreshing her victory lap, savoring notifications like trophies. That's what made her dangerous. She needed the applause to keep going. The plan relied on that hunger. We'd keep feeding incentives for her to be louder until the stage collapsed under its own weight. There were moments of doubt, though. I caught myself rereading the very messages I planned to repurpose, wondering if I crossed some invisible line. Were we playing the same cruel game she had? Or were we merely holding up a mirror to a woman who had chosen performance over humanity? The answer was messy. The righteous part of me wanted simple justice. The practical part wanted to win. I also had to be honest with myself about what I wanted out of this. It wasn't to ruin her life. I wasn't interested in that kind of permanent damage. It was to reclaim my dignity, to make sure that when people thought of that one awful post, they thought of the full picture instead of a meme. I wanted to go from that guy to the person who was played. That's a subtle difference, but it matters. Revenge that doesn't free you is just more bondage. The plan advanced to its second phase, test with small, coincidental leaks. I talked with Laura about dropping memories into conversations on group chats and gently prodding people to remember the times when Emma had been less than honest. I posted nothing. Laura and a few others did the talking. They said things like, "Remember that time Emma did X? Wild." Short, offhand comments that made people recall nuance without making it look like an orchestrated campaign. The point was not to smear. It was to reintroduce complexity into a narrative that had been purposely simplified into a joke at my expense. Meanwhile, Jonah monitored. He tracked engagement patterns and report backs from those tiny conversational nudges. He told me things in a language I half understood. Shifted sentiment analysis, engagement clusters, seed influencers. His excitement was visible, and so was mine. There was strategy and patience. There was power in letting things appear organic. Another essential part of the plan was to rebuild in public, but not like an angry, look at me now post. That would be performative. Instead, I focused on authenticity. I put up small, genuine moments, a photo of a messy apartment I was proud of, a link to an opinion piece I wrote for work, without fanfare, and candid replies to people who DM'd me. People respond to vulnerability when it feels real. They ignore it when it feels staged. So I stayed honest. My feed became slightly warmer, less curated, a counterpoint to Emma's high-gloss persona. I gained a few followers who appreciated authenticity. More importantly, people started to remember me as a person again, not a punchline. As these pieces moved into place, tension built because Emma was oblivious. She doubled down on the original humiliation. She posted follow-ups, witty retorts in stories, and petty polished videos that tried too hard to make a moment seem inconsequential. That eagerness to prove she was untouchable made her sloppy. People noticed the overcompensation. Jonah's analytics showed small but meaningful dip in her trust scores within her network. Not measurable in bodies, but visible in tone. People who used to cheer now hesitated. The cracks were working like hairline fractures before a bigger break. And then came a stupid, small thing that felt like fate. Emma reposted one of my old selfies from a group trip, captioned with a joke that turned my offhand comment into supposed proof of my awkwardness. In the comments, someone a stranger replied with a link to a throwback photo from the same trip. Me looking genuinely happy. Awkwardness nowhere in sight. It was a user with zero stake in our drama. The comment got a few likes and then fizzled, but it was an encouraging sign. When you give people a reason to look, they often see more than one side. At this point, I started to feel like a conductor. Not a malicious one, but someone orchestrating a symphony where the instruments were moments, memories, and the internet's uncanny ability to self-correct. Each small nudge, each human recollection made the melody more complex. I was still angry, don't get me wrong, but the anger thinned out into focus. The objective was clear, not to shame, but to reveal. Yet, as with any good plan, there were setbacks. A mutual friend shared a screenshot of one of Emma's posts with an added joke that was crueler than what Emma had written. It was a natural escalation, and for a moment, I feared it would blow up and make me look like I was trying to stoke a pylon. I called Jonah, who calmly reminded me of a rule we'd set: don't punch down. If it felt like the crowd was turning vicious, we paused. That restraint distinguished my move from hers. If you fight dirty, you become dirty. If you fight smart, you own the moral high ground even as you strike. The penultimate testing moment came when I asked Maya to mention in a casual group message that Emma sometimes exaggerated stories for likes. Nothing dramatic, a sentence in a longer chain about Saturday plans. But when a couple of people asked for examples, she offered an offhand memory of Emma repositioning a story to make herself the victim in a harmless college prank. The reaction was small laughter and then a few head tilts. Emma noticed that thread and slid into the conversation with her practiced brightness, but the thread had already been adjusted. The seed of doubt had been planted. Emma's replies felt defensive, a little too sharp for someone who wanted to appear unbothered. That defensiveness made her worse. She tried to shut down the conversation with sarcasm and a meme that read, "People love drama." That was the moment I had been waiting for. The mirror. I didn't need to expose her secrets yet. I just needed to set up the conditions where her own need for performance would make her stumble. We were inching toward the move I had saved under Endgame. Not a dramatic takedown, but a calibrated exposure of inconsistency that would leave observers asking a lot of questions. It would involve repurposing a voicemail she'd left once, calm and candid, and juxtaposing it with a public post where she acted wildly different. The voicemail wasn't illegal to have. It was hers. The context, if presented carefully, would highlight that the person she presented to the world wasn't the person she privately was. That alone wasn't cruelty, it was revelation. The problem with plans is that they demand patience. There were days I wanted to crash it all down and just call her out in a barrage of posts designed to wound. There were nights I lay awake and imagined her losing followers, losing status. Those fantasies were childish, and I recognized that. The smarter part of me reminded me of how satisfying it would be to have the last laugh come, not from spectacle, but from the slow erosion of a lie. One night, a week into the plan, I walked past a bar where Emma used to go. She was inside, loud and laughing, center stage in the way I'd grown to loathe. Watching her from across the street, I felt none of the old ache that had lived in my chest when we were together. Instead, I felt something colder, sharper, and altogether more useful. Resolve. She was still performing. I was building a scaffold for the truth to show through. If she wanted applause, let her have it for a while. Applause built pressure. Pressure eventually cracks things. By the end of chapter 2, if I can even call it that, in my own life, the plan was humming. Small actions, dispersed across different people and platforms, were shifting the tone. I wasn't loud. I wasn't dramatic. I smiled in the store when people bumped past me and pretended their glance was just passing curiosity, not pity. My feed grew quietly human again. Jonah watched his analytics with an unhealthy gleam in his eyes and called me methodical. Maya became my human antenna. Laura kept the receipts ready. And Emma? She kept posting. The queen of her curated castle, oblivious to the slow rot. The most important part of this chapter, for me, was the quiet thrill of taking back control. Not throwing a tantrum, not humiliating her in the same petty way, but rewriting the context until people could no longer laugh at me without asking why they were laughing at all. Revenge, I learned, isn't always lightning. Sometimes it's the long, patient storm that waters a seed until it finally bursts. There's pride in that. There's also fear, because once you start moving pieces, you can't always predict how they'll land. But if humility had a middle name, it would be strategy. And if embarrassment could be countered with thoughtfulness, then maybe what I was building was more than revenge. Maybe it was a reclamation. When I went to bed that night, my phone buzzing like a contented animal with small notifications, I didn't check them. Control, I told myself, as if it was a mantra, not a goal. Control, play smarter, not louder. The plan was in motion. The next phase would be execution, and that's where things would get interesting. It wasn't about getting even anymore. It was about making her feel exactly what I felt. By the time I moved into chapter 3 of the slow burn operation I had constructed, I wasn't thinking about pride. I wasn't even thinking about humiliation for myself. The humiliation was hers now, or it would be, if I played this right. I'd been patient, methodical, a conductor orchestrating a symphony of subtle nudges and human psychology, but patience only mattered if execution was flawless. One misstep, and all of it could collapse, leaving me looking like the desperate petty ex instead of the quiet architect of the inevitable unraveling. Execution started small. I didn't want to drop the big reveal immediately. I wanted tension, curiosity, and pattern recognition to do the heavy lifting. So I began with accidental posts. The first one was harmless on the surface, a throwback photo of me at a small house party from years ago, laughing, relaxed, carefree. The trick was in the caption. Funny how some people's energy feels different in real life than online. Nothing explicit, no mention of Emma, just an innocuous post that would plant a seed. Jonah called it a subtle frame shift. Maya liked and commented, nothing scandalous, just a memory. Within hours, someone from Emma's circle replied with a joking comment. Oh, the mystery. What energy are we talking about? And a thread began to form, small at first, teasing the edge of curiosity without giving anything away. Emma noticed. That was obvious. She posted a series of effortless selfies with captions meant to exude carefree perfection, but it was overcompensation. She had always been reliant on applause, and now her audience was just a little skeptical. Her carefully curated armor had a tiny crack. I could see it in the tone of her posts, the slightly overdone captions, the desperate push for likes that didn't come as easily anymore. The first stage of the plan worked. Doubt. Next came contextual leaks. This was the part that made me nervous, the part where I had to balance power with precision. I uploaded a small snippet of a voicemail she had left me years ago. Harmless, candid, almost affectionate in tone, onto a private cloud and shared it accidentally in a group chat where a few mutuals could see it. It wasn't malicious, it wasn't even intended to humiliate her in isolation. But when Jonah modeled the spread, it became clear. Context shifts perception. Suddenly, people could juxtapose her carefree public persona with the candid, private side, and inconsistencies started to appear. Reactions were immediate. Her friends commented privately, "Wait, that's different. I didn't know she said that." A ripple of doubt spread. Emma tried to counteract it publicly. Stories, jokes, sarcastic posts, but she was already reacting, already defensive. The brilliance of this was subtlety. I stayed anonymous. I didn't post angrily, didn't comment. I let the narrative evolve, nudging at key points through proxies, friends, and Jonah's digital modeling. The thrill of watching it unfold was intense. Every little post I orchestrated, every carefully framed comment or shared memory brought waves of satisfaction. But it wasn't pure joy. There were moments of guilt, fleeting and sharp. I remembered her in happier times. The laughter, the jokes, the warmth. I had once loved her, and here I was, orchestrating a public reflection of her own arrogance back at her. There were flashes of empathy, brief pangs where I questioned whether I was crossing a line. But the humiliation she'd caused me had carved a permanent fissure, and rationalization came easily. She had started this. I was only completing the narrative arc. Drama escalated quickly after the first week. A few mutuals shared coincidental screenshots that showed Emma saying one thing publicly and completely different things in private. People noticed inconsistencies. Comments changed tone from amusement to curiosity to quiet criticism. Small influencers, unknowingly, picked up on the disparity and commented with subtle humor. Is it me, or does she post differently in the wild than in the selfies? Emma panicked. I could see it in her posting patterns. More stories, more hashtags, more curated jokes to distract from the cracks forming in her image. She tried to drown doubt in performance. The more she posted, the more the audience saw her scrambling. And the more the audience saw her scrambling, the more they questioned what she had done in the first place. Jonah and I watched metrics spike in our favor. Engagement now wasn't about me. It was about her credibility unraveling under its own weight. I maintained calm, deliberately. No reactive posts, no angry messages, no signature left behind. That was crucial. Part of the execution was invisibility. I was not a participant. I was a strategist, a quiet hand nudging events so they appeared organic. People hate the puppeteer being revealed. The beauty of this is that Emma was puppeteering herself, and everyone else was starting to notice the strings. The mirror move, the endgame, was coming. I had held on to one key element, the voicemail and a couple of old screenshots that showed Emma privately boasting or joking about moments she had publicly twisted to mock me. Timing was everything. I released them strategically through a mutual friend's social media post, framed as nostalgia and reflection, not revenge. The post went viral among our circle, shared with subtle commentary. Funny how memories look different depending on who tells the story. Pandemonium. Emma's post immediately tried to drown it out, but by this point, credibility was leaking. Friends and followers began questioning the consistency of her narrative. People who had laughed at me started reevaluating. Comments that once cheered her were now muted or cautious. It was incredible to watch. The plan, executed with restraint, had reached critical mass. And yes, the emotional roller coaster hit hard. I felt exhilarated, like a chess player watching the opponent walk into a trap they didn't see. But there were also moments of guilt, seeing her defensive stories, reading the tiny panicked replies, remembering the girl I had once trusted. The revenge was satisfying, but it wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was poetic justice, calculated to reveal truth and balance perception. Emma tried to counterattack. She shared selective screenshots of me, tried to spin stories, even called out mutual friends who had shared the mirror posts. But the plan was airtight, layered, anonymous, and strategically dispersed. Each attempt she made to regain control only highlighted the inconsistency in her behavior. The audience noticed the desperation. They didn't need me to point it out. My proxies, my subtle nudges, and the organic spread of information had done the work. By midweek, the damage was undeniable. Emma's perfectly polished online persona had minor but visible cracks. Her usual supporters were now divided. Some loyal, some hesitant, some quietly questioning what they had assumed was truth. She was still performing, still charming, but the audience had glimpsed the reality behind the curtain. And me? I sat back quietly, sipping coffee, reading the threads unfold. There were moments I laughed quietly, moments I winced, and moments I felt the old ache of betrayal. But there was also something profoundly satisfying in the precision, the subtlety, the orchestration of events. This wasn't chaos. This was art. The final piece, the slow burn, the crowning stroke, was to let it simmer. I didn't need to pile on. The trickle of revelation, the exposure of inconsistencies, the audience's own curiosity and skepticism, it all worked in my favor. I didn't need to speak. I didn't need to comment. The plan had entered self-propelling mode. Watching her panic, watching her overcompensate, watching the small cracks turn into visible fissures, It was a thrill I didn't expect, not because I wanted her ruined, but because I had turned humiliation into power, pain into strategy. And somewhere between triumph and reflection, I realized I had grown in this process. I wasn't just reclaiming dignity, I was learning control, patience, and subtlety in ways I hadn't known I could. When I finally put my phone down that night, I felt a calm I hadn't experienced in weeks. The storm had begun, and I was at the center of it, orchestrating quietly, confidently, effectively. The execution had succeeded because it was smart, not loud, because I had waited, because I had observed, because I had understood the pattern. Emma had fought to humiliate me in public. I had responded by creating a truth she couldn't stage, a reality she couldn't control, and a narrative the audience couldn't ignore. And in that quiet triumph, I understood something fundamental. Revenge isn't just about anger, it's about precision, patience, and the satisfaction of reclaiming your narrative without losing yourself in the process. By the end of the week, Emma's post felt slightly hollow, her laughs slightly forced, her perfect smile slightly strained, and for the first time in months, the world could see her the way I had always known her. And I, for the first time in just as long, felt like myself again. When she realized the joke was on her, I finally smiled. It hit slowly at first, a ripple across her social media feeds, subtle yet unmistakable. Comments that once cheered her on were hesitant now, questioning. Mutual friends whispered in DMs rather than gushing in the open. Even the strangers who had once trolled me in her threads were quieter. By the time I fully grasped it, the shift had become undeniable. Emma's credibility had crumbled, piece by piece, and I was watching from the quiet corner of my life where I had rebuilt myself. She wasn't destroyed. This wasn't a nuclear obliteration, but she had lost the effortless, untouchable aura she had cultivated. Her carefully polished image had cracks too obvious to ignore. The laughter that once followed her posts now carried a trace of doubt. Even the most loyal cheerleaders couldn't hide it. It was satisfying. God, it was satisfying. But like any triumph, it was bittersweet. Revenge had its thrill, yes, but in the quiet aftermath, I found myself reflecting. The truth is, there's a strange emptiness in seeing someone fall when you've loved them once. I remembered her laugh, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled at something ridiculous I said, the quiet, almost shy side of her no one else had seen. I hadn't wanted to destroy that version of her. I'd wanted to reclaim my own dignity, and somehow I had. Friends began returning. Not all of them, but the ones who mattered. The ones who had paused, unsure what had really happened, who had only seen one side of a story, now reached out with messages tinged with admiration. That was impressive. One wrote, another said, I didn't know you had it in you. I laughed at that. I had it in me all along. I had just needed the right moment and the right plan. People respected strategy, subtlety, and patience, and they began seeing that in me. Relationships shifted in other ways too. Some who had taken her side out of habit or fear quietly adjusted their perception. Some came back into my life cautiously, but the difference was clear. They respected me, not out of obligation or pity, but out of recognition. Others drifted away, which, in retrospect, was fine. The people who leave in moments like these weren't really meant to stay. And me, I changed. I was smarter, more confident, and yes, more patient. Revenge had forced me to think in ways I never had before. Analyze, strategize, predict, manipulate subtly without losing my own moral ground. I had discovered reserves of composure and intelligence I didn't know I possessed. That growth, quiet and internal, felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders. I could breathe again. The final stage of the plan, what I dubbed the mirror move, had played out flawlessly. That voice missile, paired with the old screenshots, had circulated quietly, organically. The irony was perfect. She had spent so much time and energy trying to control perception that she hadn't noticed the very narrative unraveling under her own hands. It was public, yes, but carefully framed so it didn't feel like a personal attack. It felt like truth being reflected. And the audience responded. Emma noticed eventually. I didn't have to watch her scramble. Her posts spoke for themselves. The desperation, the overcompensation, the slightly forced humor. She was trying to salvage a story that was already broken. The applause she had chased for months no longer came. Instead, there was quiet skepticism, subtle judgment, and the occasional side eye from people she had once counted on to validate her every post. I felt a strange mix of triumph and pity. Triumph because justice, quiet, calculated, undeniable, had been served. Pity because the truth is that the image she had built so carefully had never been real, and watching the cracks appear wasn't about cruelty. It was about clarity. People were finally seeing her, unfiltered, and she couldn't control it anymore. The best part? I didn't have to speak. I didn't have to gloat. The plan had done the talking. Every subtle post, every accidental leak, every strategic seed planted had shifted perception. The narrative had corrected itself. My silence became its own power, a sharp contrast to her frantic attempts to perform. I realized that sometimes the strongest revenge is the one that doesn't need to announce itself. Life moved forward, slowly, gently. I didn't post about the victory. Didn't recount it in stories or statuses. It wasn't necessary. What mattered was how I carried myself afterward. Confident, calm, and subtly untouchable. I walked into work without a shadow of the humiliation that had once followed me, re-engaged with friends who mattered, and even allowed myself to laugh at the absurdity of the whole ordeal. There were small, almost comical moments that reminded me of the journey. A friend sent me a meme that perfectly encapsulated Emma's predicament. Her panicked face next to the words, "When the plan backfires and you realize the audience isn't on your side." I laughed harder than I expected. Revenge in this case had been both strategic and slightly humorous in its execution. Life had a strange way of serving poetic justice. I also noticed subtle shifts in myself. Confidence, yes, but more importantly, self-respect. I hadn't compromised my ethics, hadn't posted anything malicious, hadn't become the caricature she had made of me. I had orchestrated a complex, patient plan and reclaimed control over my own narrative. That realization brought a deep sense of satisfaction, the kind that doesn't require external validation. Closure, finally, came in quiet moments. I walked past a cafe where Emma used to hang out, her laughter echoing faintly in my memory, but I felt no anger, no desire for confrontation. The story had played out perfectly without my interference in the last act. She had her consequences. I had my dignity. Both of us moved on in different directions. Even humor found its way back into my life. I shared an inside joke with Jonah, laughed over coffee with Maya, and messaged Lara about a ridiculous memory from our college days. Life, after all, continued, and it was mine to reclaim fully. I realized something crucial. Revenge, when executed with intelligence and patience, doesn't just restore what was lost. It teaches lessons about self-control, strategy, and resilience. I had been hurt, humiliated, and dismissed. But I came out not just vindicated, but stronger, wiser, and more confident than ever. New opportunities emerged too, almost organically. People who had seen the narrative shift reach out professionally and personally, drawn by curiosity or admiration. I started new projects with a sense of renewed purpose, approached relationships with clearer boundaries, and allowed myself to embrace growth without fear. The past had shaped me, but it didn't define me. Emma faded gradually from my online world. Her posts became less frequent, less influential, until she was just another account people scrolled past. The sting of humiliation she had inflicted no longer lingered. It had been neutralized, transformed into a story of empowerment, of reclamation. And me, I finally smiled. Not the fleeting smile that comes from petty satisfaction, but a genuine, quiet one. The kind of smile that arrives after turmoil, after strategy, after patience and perseverance have done their work. The smile of someone who knows that they survived, they adapted, and they won not by causing destruction, but by reclaiming truth. I closed my laptop that night, stretched, and let the silence sink in. No notifications, no alerts, no drama, just calm, just peace. The storm had passed, and I had emerged intact, wiser, and quietly triumphant. Revenge had been a teacher. It had taught me patience, strategy, and the importance of subtlety. But more importantly, it had reminded me that dignity isn't given. It's reclaimed, piece by piece, with intelligence, restraint, and courage. And as I lay down to sleep, I realized something else. The world is bigger than any humiliation, stronger than any cruelty, and kinder than we sometimes expect. My chapter with Emma was over. My story, however, was just beginning. I was ready for it. All right, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the story. We have so many more amazing stories coming your way, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to reach 100K subscribers by the end of this year, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.